Imagine sitting on a plane, thousands of feet above the ground, thinking it's just another normal flight. You're watching a movie, drinking coffee, maybe even planning what you'll do when you land. Then, suddenly, boom! A deafening explosion shakes the entire aircraft. The lights flicker. Passengers start screaming. The plane violently drops through the sky. In that terrifying moment, hundreds of people realize they might never see their families again. Some begin crying. Some start praying. Others pull out their phones to record what they believe could be their final message. A husband grabs his wife's hand so tightly that neither wants to let go. A mother holds her child close and promises everything will be okay, even though she's terrified herself. And inside the cockpit, two pilots are fighting a battle against time, knowing that one wrong move could send everyone on board crashing to the ground. But what happened next shocked the entire world. How did a routine flight turn into a nightmare at 34,000 feet? What caused the terrifying explosion? And how did hundreds of passengers come within seconds of disaster before a miracle changed everything? This isn't just a story about a plane. It's a story about fear, survival, courage, and the moment ordinary people were forced to face what could have been the last day of their lives. Stay with me until the end, because the final moments of this flight are almost impossible to believe, and the lesson the survivors learned afterward might change the way you look at your own life forever. Have you ever boarded a plane, fastened your seatbelt, and felt completely safe? That was exactly how everyone on Flight 728 felt that morning. The airport was crowded with travelers heading toward different destinations. Some were rushing through security checkpoints, while others relaxed with coffee in their hands as they waited for boarding announcements. Children pointed excitedly at the airplanes outside the giant terminal windows. Families took selfies before their vacations. Everything felt normal. Among the passengers was Daniel Carter, a high school teacher who had spent months planning a special trip with his wife, Emily. The couple had recently celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary, and this vacation was their chance to escape their busy lives and spend time together. As they waited near the gate, Daniel looked at Emily and smiled. "Can you believe we're finally doing this?" Emily laughed. "I've been counting down the days for months." The boarding announcement soon echoed through the terminal. Passengers lined up, showing their boarding passes and walking down the jet bridge toward the aircraft. Flight attendants greeted everyone with friendly smiles. "Welcome aboard. Have a great flight. Your seat is just down the aisle." The atmosphere was calm and cheerful. Daniel and Emily settled into their seats near the middle of the cabin. Around them sat people from all walks of life. A businessman reviewed documents on his tablet. A young mother helped her daughter buckle her seatbelt. An elderly couple looked excited about visiting their grandchildren. To everyone on board, this was simply another flight. The captain introduced himself over the intercom. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Robert Hayes speaking. We're expecting a smooth flight today with excellent weather conditions. Flight time will be approximately 3 hours and 20 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy your journey." The announcement brought smiles throughout the cabin. Moments later, the aircraft slowly pushed back from the gate. The engines grew louder. Passengers looked out the windows as the plane taxied toward the runway. Then came the familiar sensation of acceleration. The aircraft raced forward. Faster, faster, and suddenly, the ground fell away beneath them. The plane climbed smoothly into the bright blue sky. Within minutes, the city below became a collection of tiny buildings and winding roads. Soon, even those disappeared beneath a blanket of clouds. The flight settled into a comfortable routine. Passengers opened books, watched movies, and listened to music. Flight attendants moved through the cabin serving drinks and snacks. Laughter occasionally drifted through the rows. Children played games on tablets while others slept peacefully against their parents' shoulders. Daniel leaned back in his seat. "This is exactly what I needed," he said. Emily nodded. For once, no deadlines. No stress. Just us. For nearly 2 hours, everything went according to plan. The aircraft cruised steadily at 34,000 feet. Outside, the sky was clear and beautiful. Inside the cockpit, Captain Hayes and his co-pilot monitored instruments and chatted casually about the flight. Nothing appeared unusual. Every system showed normal readings. But far ahead of them, hidden within a large weather system, conditions were beginning to change. Meteorologists had predicted only light turbulence in the region. Nothing serious. Nothing dangerous. However, weather can be unpredictable. Sometimes nature hides surprises that technology cannot fully anticipate. As Flight 728 continued its journey, the first sign of trouble appeared. The aircraft gave a small bump. Most passengers barely noticed. A few seconds later, another bump followed. Then another. Several people looked up from their phones. Daniel glanced toward the window. "You feel that?" Emily shrugged. "Just turbulence." The seatbelt sign illuminated above their heads. A soft chime echoed through the cabin. Flight attendants paused their service and secured their carts. Again, nobody seemed concerned. Turbulence was common. Most frequent travelers had experienced it dozens of times before. The captain made a brief announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're passing through an area of rough air. Please return to your seats and keep your seatbelts fastened." His voice sounded calm and confident. Passengers obeyed and continued their activities. But inside the cockpit, something unexpected caught the co-pilot's attention. One of the aircraft's instruments displayed an unusual reading. At first, it seemed insignificant. A minor fluctuation. The kind of thing that sometimes happened and corrected itself within seconds. Yet instead of disappearing, the warning remained. The co-pilot frowned. "Captain, take a look at this." Captain Hayes leaned forward. The instrument was showing information neither pilot expected to see. A second warning light suddenly appeared. Then a third. The cockpit became noticeably quieter. The casual conversation stopped. Both pilots focused entirely on the growing list of alerts. Outside the cabin, passengers remained unaware of what was happening. They continued watching movies, reading books, taking naps, dreaming about the destinations waiting for them. None of them knew that high above the clouds, something had begun to go terribly wrong. And within the next few minutes, Flight 728 would transform from an ordinary journey into a fight for survival. VidIQ. The first loud bang was so powerful that it shook the entire aircraft. For a split second, nobody understood what had happened. Passengers looked around in confusion. Some thought luggage had fallen inside the cabin. Others assumed the plane had hit severe turbulence. But then came a second sound, louder, sharper, and far more frightening. Boom! The aircraft suddenly lurched to one side. Gasps filled the cabin. Several passengers screamed. Drinks flew from tray tables and splashed across the aisle. Overhead compartments rattled violently. The peaceful atmosphere that had existed just moments earlier disappeared instantly. Daniel grabbed the armrests of his seat as the plane shook beneath him. "What was that?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Before Daniel could answer, the aircraft dropped unexpectedly. The sensation felt like a roller coaster plunging down a steep hill. Stomachs turned. Passengers cried out in fear. A baby began screaming somewhere near the back of the cabin. The seatbelt sign remained illuminated as flight attendants quickly took their seats. Their professional smiles had vanished. Although they remained calm, passengers could see concern in their eyes. Inside the cockpit, warning alarms echoed continuously. Red and amber lights flashed across the instrument panel. Captain Hayes immediately understood that this was far more serious than turbulence. One of the aircraft's critical systems had suffered a major failure. The controls were no longer responding normally. Every movement required more effort than usual. The co-pilot rapidly reviewed emergency procedures while Captain Hayes focused on keeping the aircraft stable. "We've got a serious problem," the co-pilot said. Captain Hayes nodded. "I know." The aircraft shook again. Another warning alarm sounded. The captain immediately contacted air traffic control. "Mayday! Mayday! Mayday! Flight 728 declaring an emergency." Those words sent a chill through everyone in the control center. Emergency situations were rare. A mayday call meant the crew was facing immediate danger. Air traffic controllers quickly cleared nearby aircraft from the area and began assisting Flight 728. Meanwhile, inside the passenger cabin, fear continued to spread. People could feel that something was wrong. The aircraft wasn't flying normally. Its movements were unpredictable. Each sudden vibration increased the anxiety among the passengers. Some stared silently out the windows. Others began praying. A few passengers reached for their phones despite being thousands of feet above the ground. Many simply wanted to record a message for their loved ones. One elderly man quietly looked at a photograph of his family. A young woman wiped tears from her face as she whispered a prayer. Nearby, a mother held her young son tightly against her chest. "It's okay," she told him. But her shaking voice revealed that she wasn't sure herself. Daniel looked around the cabin. The fear was impossible to ignore. Every face told the same story. People were realizing that this might not end safely. Emily squeezed his hand. "Do you think we're going to be okay?" Daniel wanted to reassure her. He wanted to say everything would be fine. But when he looked at the frightened passengers surrounding them, he found himself unable to speak. Inside the cockpit, the situation continued worsening. The aircraft had begun losing altitude. Not rapidly enough to cause immediate disaster, but enough to create serious concern. The pilots needed a safe place to land. And they needed one quickly. Captain Hayes studied the navigation display. Several airports appeared on the screen. Most were too far away. Some had runways unsuitable for an emergency landing. Time was running out. Every minute in the air increased the risk. The aircraft suddenly encountered another pocket of turbulence. The cabin shook violently. A woman screamed. Several oxygen masks shifted slightly within their compartments, causing panic among nearby passengers. The crew immediately made announcements urging everyone to remain seated and keep their seatbelts fastened. The flight attendants spoke calmly despite the danger. Their professionalism helped prevent complete chaos. Still, fear had taken hold. Passengers exchanged nervous looks. Some cried openly. Others sat frozen in silence. The reality of the situation was becoming impossible to ignore. This was no longer a routine flight. This was an emergency. High above the clouds, hundreds of lives depended on the decisions being made inside the cockpit. Captain Hayes continued searching for solutions. Years of training prepared pilots for moments exactly like this. Every simulator session, every emergency drill, every difficult lesson. They all existed for situations where lives hung in the balance. The captain knew panic would only make things worse. He remained focused, calm, determined. Finally, a possible solution appeared on the navigation display. A regional airport lay ahead. It wasn't ideal. The runway was shorter than preferred. Weather conditions were less than perfect. But it was within reach. More importantly, it offered the best chance of survival. Captain Hayes looked at his co-pilot. "This is our shot." The co-pilot nodded. Both men understood the challenge ahead. Getting the damaged aircraft onto that runway would require extraordinary skill. One mistake could be catastrophic. Back in the cabin, passengers had no idea what decision had just been made. All they knew was that the aircraft remained unstable and the ground was still thousands of feet below them. As Flight 728 pushed forward through the clouds, fear filled every corner of the cabin. The battle for survival had begun. And the most dangerous part of the journey was still ahead. Section 3. The Fight for Survival. The moment Captain Hayes identified the regional airport ahead, a small spark of hope appeared inside the cockpit. But hope alone wouldn't save the aircraft. The real challenge was only beginning. The damaged plane was still thousands of feet above the ground, and every minute brought new risks. Warning alarms continued flashing across the instrument panel. Some flight controls responded normally, while others reacted unpredictably. The pilots had no guarantee that the aircraft would remain stable all the way to the runway. Yet there was no other option. They had to try. "We're committed," Captain Hayes said firmly. The co-pilot nodded and immediately began preparing for the emergency approach. Air traffic controllers on the ground were already working at full speed. They cleared all other aircraft from the airport's airspace and alerted emergency response teams. Fire trucks raced toward the runway. Ambulances lined up nearby. Medical personnel prepared equipment in case the landing ended in disaster. Everyone understood the seriousness of the situation. Back inside the cabin, the atmosphere had changed completely. The casual conversations and laughter from earlier were gone. Fear had taken their place. Passengers could sense the aircraft descending. The engines sounded different. The plane's movements felt strange. Every vibration caused nervous eyes to dart toward the windows. Daniel looked at Emily and saw tears forming in her eyes. Neither of them wanted to admit what they were thinking. For the first time since boarding the flight, they were genuinely afraid they might never make it home. Around them, similar emotions filled the cabin. A businessman who had spent the entire flight working now stared silently at a family photograph on his phone. A young couple held hands tightly. Several passengers prayed quietly. Others simply closed their eyes. In moments like these, people often think about the things that matter most. Family, friends, dreams they haven't achieved, words they never said. The possibility of losing everything suddenly feels very real. A flight attendant moved carefully through the aisle, checking seatbelts and helping passengers prepare for an emergency landing. Despite the danger, the crew remained remarkably calm. Their professionalism helped keep panic under control. Soon, the captain's voice came through the speakers. His tone was steady but serious. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain speaking. We are preparing for an emergency landing. Please listen carefully to the cabin crew and follow all instructions. We are doing everything possible to bring you safely to the ground." The announcement confirmed everyone's worst fears. Gasps echoed through the cabin. Several passengers began crying. Others sat frozen in shock. Daniel reached for Emily's hand. She squeezed it tightly. Neither spoke for several moments. Then Daniel looked directly into her eyes. "No matter what happens, I love you." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I love you too." Around them, countless similar conversations were taking place. Words that people often save for later suddenly became urgent, because nobody knew how much time remained. Meanwhile, the airport grew larger in the cockpit windows. The runway was now visible in the distance. Captain Hayes carefully guided the damaged aircraft toward it. Every movement had to be precise. The aircraft was responding unevenly, forcing the pilots to make constant corrections. A strong crosswind swept across the approach path. The plane drifted slightly sideways. The captain adjusted the controls. The aircraft responded, but not as smoothly as he hoped. Another warning alarm sounded. The co-pilot immediately checked the instruments. "Speed is good. Altitude stable. Runway in sight." Every update mattered. Every second counted. The aircraft continued descending. 5,000 feet. 4,000. 3,000. The runway slowly grew larger. Emergency vehicles were clearly visible now, lined up along the edges like silent witnesses waiting for the outcome. Inside the cabin, passengers assumed the brace position. Heads lowered. Hands locked behind necks. The reality of what was happening became impossible to ignore. This was it. The moment everything depended on. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat. The cabin was filled with quiet sobs and whispered prayers. No one knew what the next few minutes would bring. The ground rushed closer. 2,000 feet. 1,000 feet. The captain remained completely focused. Years of training had prepared him for moments exactly like this. Yet even with all his experience, this would be one of the most difficult landings of his career. The aircraft suddenly shook as another gust of wind struck. Passengers screamed. The plane tilted slightly. Captain Hayes corrected immediately. The runway remained directly ahead. "Stay with me," he muttered quietly to the aircraft. 500 feet. 300 feet. 100 feet. The runway seemed to rush toward them. Inside the cabin, many passengers closed their eyes. Some couldn't bear to watch. Others stared ahead, unable to look away. The landing gear was down. The runway lights flashed beneath them. The aircraft descended lower, and lower, and lower. Then, bang! The wheels slammed into the runway with tremendous force. The impact shook the entire aircraft. Passengers were thrown against their seatbelts. The plane bounced once before touching down again. Tires screeched against the pavement. The aircraft raced forward at incredible speed. For a brief moment, everyone felt relief. They had reached the ground. But the danger wasn't over. Not even close. The damaged aircraft continued speeding toward the end of the runway. And there was far less runway remaining than anyone wanted to see. The aircraft was on the ground. But nobody was celebrating. Not yet. Flight 728 continued racing down the runway at terrifying speed. The wheels screamed against the pavement as Captain Hayes fought to slow the damaged aircraft. Every passenger could feel the violent vibrations beneath their feet. The end of the runway was approaching fast. Far too fast. Inside the cabin, fear returned instantly. Many passengers had thought the worst was over when the wheels touched the ground. But now they could see through the windows that the plane was still moving at an alarming speed. The runway markers flashed past one after another. The distance remaining grew shorter. Daniel looked outside and felt his stomach drop. The end of the runway was getting closer every second. Emily gripped his hand so tightly that neither of them could feel their fingers anymore. Around them, passengers stared forward in horror. Some began praying again. Others cried openly. Everyone understood what could happen if the aircraft failed to stop in time. Inside the cockpit, Captain Hayes and his co-pilot were giving everything they had. The damaged systems were making braking difficult. Every available method was being used to reduce speed. The captain's eyes never left the runway ahead. His hands remained locked on the controls. Years of experience had brought him to this moment. Hundreds of lives depended on every decision he made. Outside, emergency crews watched anxiously. Firefighters stood ready. Medical teams waited beside their vehicles. No one knew how this would end. The aircraft continued forward. The runway continued shrinking. For several terrifying seconds, it seemed impossible. Then something changed. Slowly, almost unbelievably, the speed began to decrease. Not dramatically, not instantly, but enough. The aircraft was slowing. Passengers felt the difference. The terrifying momentum that had carried them forward began to fade. Every passing second increased their chances. Still, the end of the runway remained dangerously close. The entire cabin held its breath. No one spoke. No one moved. Everyone simply waited. And then, just moments before reaching the runway's end, the aircraft finally rolled to a complete stop. Silence. Absolute silence. For several seconds, nobody reacted. The entire cabin seemed frozen. People stared at one another as if they couldn't believe what had just happened. Their minds struggled to process reality. They were alive. Against all odds, they had survived. Then a single passenger began crying. Another started laughing with relief. Someone clapped. Within moments, the entire cabin erupted with emotion. Cheers filled the aircraft. People hugged strangers sitting beside them. Passengers who had never met before embraced each other like lifelong friends. Many cried openly. Others simply sat quietly, overwhelmed by gratitude. Daniel wrapped his arms around Emily. Neither of them could stop the tears. For several moments, they said nothing. Words weren't necessary. The fact that they were still together was enough. Flight attendants, who had remained calm throughout the emergency, finally allowed themselves to show emotion. Some wiped tears from their eyes. They knew how close everyone had come to disaster. Emergency crews quickly surrounded the aircraft. The evacuation process began immediately. Passengers carefully exited the plane using emergency stairs. As Daniel stepped onto the runway, he paused for a moment. Fresh air filled his lungs. The sun felt brighter than ever before. The world looked different somehow. Not because it had changed, but because he had changed. Every passenger felt it. The simple things suddenly seemed more valuable. The sound of the wind. The warmth of sunlight. The ability to take another breath. Things that people often take for granted now felt like priceless gifts. News of the emergency spread rapidly around the world. Television networks reported the dramatic landing. Experts praised the crew's professionalism and skill. Aviation investigators later discovered that a rare mechanical failure had caused the crisis. According to specialists, the aircraft had experienced a sequence of problems that could easily have resulted in a catastrophic accident. Many experts agreed on one thing. Without the quick decisions made by Captain Hayes and his crew, hundreds of lives could have been lost. The captain became a hero overnight. But when reporters later asked him about the successful landing, his response surprised many people. He simply said, "Every member of the crew did their job. The passengers stayed brave. We were all part of the same team." His humility earned even greater respect. In the months that followed, many passengers shared how the experience changed their lives. Some repaired broken relationships. Some finally pursued dreams they had delayed for years. Others spent more time with family and loved ones. The experience had taught them a lesson they would never forget. Life is fragile. Everything can change in a single moment. One ordinary morning had turned into the most terrifying day of their lives. Yet it had also become the day they learned what truly mattered. Years later, survivors still remembered the fear they felt high above the clouds. But they also remembered something else. The courage of the crew, the kindness of strangers, the power of hope, and the miracle that allowed them to walk away. Because on that unforgettable day, when everyone thought the story would end in tragedy, they discovered that sometimes survival itself is the greatest miracle of all. And from that moment forward, every sunrise, every laugh, every hug, and every ordinary day felt like a second chance, a reminder that life is precious, and every moment should be cherished before it slips away.